On this Monday night, the Omicron variant detected in Canada. New cases are confirmed in multiple provinces.
There's no reason to panic.
The many unknowns about this new variant, how some countries are responding, and how it could affect holiday travel. Rising waters and rising fears as another atmospheric river heads for BC. Plus, sponge cities, one way communities could absorb water instead of repelling it. Ottawa's new bill to ban conversion therapy.
You just watch people basically destroy themselves.
One survivor's trauma. And why Barbados is relinquishing the Royals and becoming a republic.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are tracking developments related to the Omicron variant of the coronavirus, which has now been detected in multiple countries, including Canada. Scientists, including in South Africa, where it was first detected, are working to get reliable data from patients who are infected, but it could be 2 or 3 weeks to get answers. Omicron has a high number of mutations, including to the spike protein the virus uses to invade host cells. And among the key questions, is it much more transmissible than other variants? Does it cause more severe illness? And how capable is it of evading vaccines? Early evidence suggests it can spread rapidly, but there remains so much uncertainty. Some countries are not waiting. They've imposed tight restrictions. We'll get to that in a moment, but we begin with Abigail Bimman and Canada's response to this new variant.
First, 2 confirmed cases in Ottawa.
Both individuals are in isolation.
Another 2 confirmed in the capital late Monday, plus 1 in Quebec.
We are still making some inquiries to see exactly when, but that case came from Nigeria.
Nigeria is not one of the 7 African countries Canada slapped with heightened travel restrictions.
Ottawa Public Health is working diligently on conducting case and contact management.
There's a concerning hitch. Ottawa Public Health put out a rare news release trying to find a man who drove a white car in a private rideshare. He picked up a passenger from the Montreal airport Wednesday night and drove that person to the Ottawa suburb of Barrhaven. Public Health says the driver was likely exposed to COVID and they want him to isolate. But citing privacy, they won't say whether that case was one of the Omicron cases detected in 2 Ottawa residents who first landed in Montreal from Nigeria. There are also 2 suspected cases in Hamilton after travel to South Africa.
We have been informed that 115 travelers from countries affected by the new variant have been called to do a new PCR test and isolate themselves.
Ontario says the federal public health agency told them there are 375 people in that province who fit the bill, traveling from the 7 restricted countries in the last 2 weeks. BC says just over 200 there and up to 1,000 across the country. The federal agency wouldn't confirm any numbers to Global News by deadline.
The one thing I want to make sure is that we don't panic. There are reasons for why we are concerned. But we are not panicked.
Don't panic, since much about Omicron is still not known, including its resistance to vaccines.
We might see this chip away or erode at some of that protection. I would be shocked if our vaccines that we're using are, deemed to be quote unquote useless.
As for what can be done, Ontario and Quebec are pushing for more testing measures at the border. Quebec says all provinces lobbied the feds for that this weekend. The federal health minister would only say he'll have more to say soon. Donna?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thanks. The U.S. president says he does not expect the U.S. to impose new travel restrictions to try to limit the spread of the Omicron variant. Many other countries, though, are moving quickly. At least 14 countries are now reporting cases. In addition to Canada, cases have been confirmed in South Africa, Botswana, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, Italy, Belgium, Portugal, and the Czech Republic.
Omicron's very emergence is another reminder that although many of us might think we're done with COVID-19, it's not done with us.
The WHO's Director General says the global risk is very high, and he is urging countries to accelerate vaccination of high priority groups. Mike Armstrong is tracking developments from Washington.
Just as the world was loosening travel restrictions, they're back. In Japan, entry rules were softened just weeks ago, and the country is now banning, as of Wednesday, the arrival of all foreign nationals. The Japanese Prime Minister admits his country's reaction is stronger than most others. Now, most, but not all. Israel is temporarily banning all arrivals, while Morocco is suspending all incoming flights for 2 weeks. The number of confirmed cases around the globe is still small, but it's growing and in a lot of places. One of the latest added to the Omicron list, Spain, a 51-year-old who returned from South Africa Sunday. The new variant has ripped through a soccer team in Portugal, 13 cases so far. One player had recently traveled home to South Africa to play for the national team. Several countries are now restricting travel from South Africa, as well as other countries in that region. Experts say it's not to stop the spread of Omicron, but to at least slow it down.
With new variants, he who hesitates is lost. If you wait for certainty or for more information, it then becomes too late to do anything very effective.
President Biden is calling the Omicron virus cause for concern, but not a cause for panic.
Sooner or later, we're going to see cases of this new variant here in the United States.
Now, so far, Omicron appears to be more contagious than other variants, but not necessarily more deadly. It'll take several weeks for scientists to determine the threat. One part of that is lab tests. The other is statistical analysis of how patients with Omicron react.
It can take up to 2 to 3 weeks to see if they go into a hospital, or even worse, if they die.
Now, countries that haven't been affected are watching the ones that have. Whereas most of the travel restrictions being announced concern countries in southern Africa, others are being added to the list. Switzerland announced Monday it's bringing back its quarantine program for people arriving from, among others, Canada. Donna?
All right, Mike Armstrong in Washington, thanks. Children in BC aged 5 to 11 are the latest in Canada to roll up their sleeves for the COVID-19 shot. About 350,000 children are eligible for a dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. More than 92,000 children are registered, and invitations to book appointments are rolling out in order of registration. BC's top doctor says more than 3 million children have received the vaccine in the United States already with no major safety issues. British Columbia has extended the state of emergency caused by extreme weather until mid-December. Some highways remain closed, gas rationing is still in effect, non-essential travel is not advised, and fresh evacuation orders are in place as another atmospheric river is forecast. Heather Yurix West reports on how the city of Abbotsford is bracing for what's to come.
South of the Canada-U.S. border, the city of Sumas is under water after heavy rains and snowmelt caused the Nooksack River to flood its banks.
It is very hard, very hard. I am thinking about the people who have lost everything, what they can do, how can they survive.
In the Abbotsford neighborhood of Huntingdon Village, residents Vijay and Shashi Gautam spent the weekend watching the water levels closely as water crossed the border. But a sandbag dike built over the weekend by residents and the Canadian military is so far keeping their homes safe and dry. Though the same can't be said for this business just beyond the berm.
I was shocked this morning when we woke up that we survived it. I thought we had dodged a bullet, but and then the water started rising.
EnviroCorp Recycling had just gotten back to work after last week's flooding. Now water has shut it down a second time. Still, there is a general sense of relief in this community, at least for the time being.
There's no more coming over right now. It's kind of subsided a little bit, but we are preparing for the next weather storm that we're all worrying about coming tomorrow.
It's why more preparations are underway. Dozens of volunteers spent Monday filling hundreds of sandbags as the city prepares for the arrival of yet another atmospheric river.
Today's the day. We have nice weather. Let's get you sandbagged so that we're more prepared rather than the panic that sets in when it's pouring rain, and then we've got hundreds of volunteers out here getting soaked trying to do it.
Highway 1 east of Abbotsford was closed Sunday night after water from the Sumas River began to overflow. It's why the military and others work to construct this Tiger Dam along the highway. And for now, the roadway remains closed.
It went through the night. The effort was incredible to protect Highway 1 through the Fraser Valley.
Compared to the devastation of last week's floods, the city appears to have come through the weekend storm relatively well. But with much more rain around the corner, anxiety levels remain high.
very anxious. It's not easy living in Abbotsford right now.
Heather Urex West, Global News, Abbotsford, BC.
Environment Canada is warning the next weather system expected tonight will deliver what it calls a relatively strong punch. 50 to 100 millimeters of rain is forecast. Nearly all of southwestern BC is under a flood watch now, and the region in red on this map is under a flood warning because rivers are close to bursting their banks. In some places, that means evacuation orders are back in effect. Robin Gill reports.
It just doesn't end for the people of Merritt, BC, once again running away from water.
People just want to get back home and start dealing with their lives. Cleaning up, yeah.
Residents were slowly returning in phases after a flood overwhelmed the city of 7,000 people 2 weeks ago. But the rain keeps coming, and another evacuation order was put in place.
The levels that we saw last night would historically have been considered a high watermark, but as it was, they were actually less than half of what came through 2 weeks ago. So there's still a lot of water which is coming through Merritt at this point, and we're just managing it as best we can.
City crews have been able to protect critical infrastructure, repair dikes, and reinforce banks along the Coldwater River.
All along the wet west coast, there are flood warnings and watches. That's because of all the rivers that are affected. Take hard-hit Merritt, caught within the Nicola and Coldwater rivers, the latter of which is the cause for concern. And in Princeton, BC, a town that describes itself as where rivers meet, the Tulameen and Similkameen are making life difficult for the people there.
People are getting worn out. There's no other way to say it. I mean, you go online in the morning and you see people just hanging on. And at some point, we need a break.
But no one in this water-weary part of British Columbia is getting a break.
It's not just a rain event. It's not just a snow melting event. It's also a successive storm event.
These are anxious times.
Thank God the water didn't come out to my house, so it was nice. It was nice to go home and check it.
The record-breaking rain has saturated this soil and made life so hard for so many here. With more rain coming, the raging rivers could put more properties and more lives in limbo. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
Canada moves another step closer to outlawing conversion therapy. Coming up, what one man endured undergoing the discredited practice. The federal government has introduced new legislation to ban what's known as conversion therapy. It's the discredited practice of attempting to change an individual's sexual orientation to heterosexual or their gender identity to cisgender. If passed, the bill would outlaw conversion therapy altogether, whether it involves a minor or an adult. And anyone who tries to practice or promote it could face charges. People who have gone through the agony of it hope it will spare others from the same experience. Mike LeCouture reports.
I constantly have that doubt of, am I actually evil or sick or not? It will always be there, that way of that track of thinking.
The scars of conversion therapy have only started to heal for Adam Frey. The 36-year-old spent nearly a decade going through the controversial and scientifically unfounded practice of trying to change his sexual orientation, all at the urging of his family.
Young Earth creationists, belief in the demonic, that I was demonized.
His family even performed an exorcism on him. Frey says leaving conversion therapy meant having the strength to be seen as evil or sick by those closest to him. But it came with a cost.
It's definitely marked me. I've been estranged from my family for 10 years. I have 9 nieces and nephews that I haven't seen.
Frey does have a sense of hope today with the reintroduction of the bill banning conversion therapy in children and adults outright. An earlier version only made it a criminal offense to force adults to undergo the practice.
There's no way to consent to something that is inherently barbaric, inherently abusive.
In the last parliament, the bill faced some opposition from half the Conservative caucus and then was held up in the Senate.
They will say this bill harms religious freedoms. It does not. They will say this bill harms freedom of expression. It does not.
The Liberals hope those arguments get the bill passed as quickly as possible. Mike LeCouture, Global News, Ottawa.
2 years after convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein died in jail while awaiting trial for sex trafficking, his longtime companion is standing trial. A jury will determine whether Ghislaine Maxwell was Epstein's accomplice. In opening statements, prosecutors described Maxwell as a predator, saying she and Epstein were partners in crime. The 59-year-old is charged with 6 counts related to sex trafficking. She is accused of recruiting and grooming underage girls for Epstein to sexually abuse. The trial is expected to last over a month, and if convicted, Maxwell faces up to 80 years in prison. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey has announced he is leaving the social media platform he helped create. The 45-year-old co-founded Twitter in 2006. He announced his departure in a tweet saying, "There aren't many companies that get to this level, and there aren't many founders that choose their company over their own ego." Twitter shares soared with the news this morning. Dorsey is also CEO of the payment firm Square, and some investors questioned whether he could be effective leading both companies. Dorsey will be replaced by Twitter's chief technical officer, Parag Agrawal. Next, the spongy solution to make cities more resilient to floods. After every extreme weather event, it becomes clear we need to find ways to be more resilient. Most of our cities and our infrastructure are not designed to handle record amounts of rainfall. That, because of climate change, is becoming more common. There's a new idea taking root that harnesses the power of nature and absorbs water like a sponge. Mike Drolet explains how it works.
There's no undoing the damage in British Columbia. Weeks into an unrelenting flood, the hope is that it doesn't get any worse. Eventually, the lost roads and houses will be rebuilt, but to avoid a repeat, urban planners say we need a dramatic change in the way we think. Our concrete-laden cities have long been developed on the premise that we can control flooding with storm drains, but when it rains too much, those drains get overwhelmed. To solve that problem, engineers have turned to nature. Green space, they've discovered, acts like a sponge, soaking up and releasing water slowly.
Cities are areas that a lot of the natural surfaces have been covered with concrete or other paved surfaces. And what that in effect does is it doesn't allow water, including rainwater, to go where it naturally would, which is below the ground.
China didn't develop the idea of the sponge city, but they've embraced it. The city of Chongqing, for one, recently converted 99 hectares into a wetland park, which now acts like a giant sponge. But that's China, where change happens fast. While not as dramatic a transformation, Toronto is redeveloping its portlands with an eye towards increased future flooding. This desolate-looking plot of land will have an overabundance of green space for aesthetics, yes, but mostly necessity. Toronto used to have a large system of streams which naturally controlled flooding, but they've all but vanished. There's only so much city planners can do when the neighborhoods we live in are dominated by hard surfaces. Kitchener, Ontario saw that problem and got creative, incentivizing residents to lower their stormwater tax by creating more green space on their properties.
There can be debate about the cause of climate change, but I don't think there's a lot of debate about the fact that it is occurring. So in order to try to mitigate any negative impacts from those changes, we are implementing strategies today in order to protect ourselves in the future.
You could say they're trying to stay dry by soaking up new ideas. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Next, why Barbados is severing ties with the Queen. Sweden's political roller coaster took another big turn today. The country re-elected its prime minister, who resigned last week, just hours after taking the post. Magdalena Andersson and her Social Democrats won by a narrow margin in a new vote today. She will attempt to lead until the election next September. Andersson, who was previously finance minister, had stepped down after her two-party coalition collapsed over her proposed budget. The Caribbean nation of Barbados is starting a new chapter in its history. It's out with the Queen and in with a president, the first Commonwealth country in nearly 3 decades to declare itself a republic. The split is amicable, though. Prince Charles flew to Barbados to watch it all happen. Redmond Shannon explains why Barbados is cutting ties with the British monarchy.
For Barbados Republicans, this moment of celebration is generations in the making.
That colonial cloak, a wicked British joke, no longer cover us. Sunset on the empire.
The first British ship landed in Barbados in 1625. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were sent into slavery on the island's plantations until emancipation in the 1800s. It wasn't until the 1960s that Barbados became independent. Prime Minister Mia Mottley taking the next step in 2021, welcoming Prince Charles to the event, the man who would have been the country's next head of state.
Her job is to bring Barbados forward to the 21st century and to get our grip away from the slave master grip.
But there is some unease about how the formal process was pushed through Parliament without ever consulting the public via referendum.
I guess that the public didn't really have much say on that.
For the government to do this here to the people of Barbados is very wrong, and I see it as illegal.
There are 15 other Commonwealth realms, including Canada. 22 years ago, Australian voters rejected a republic, partly because the proposal involved a president elected by lawmakers rather than voters. Barbados is adopting that system, with outgoing Governor-General Sandra Mason becoming president.
So it's possible that once Barbados becomes a republic, we may see renewed calls for that in Jamaica as well.
Royal historian Carolyn Harris says any path to a Canadian republic is far more complex, even if polls suggest most Canadians think the monarchy is out of date.
And it's very difficult for all 10 provinces to be on the same page at the same time. Also, treaties with Indigenous peoples or with the Crown.
As the Crown fades from prominence in Barbados, there are at least some legacies of empire that remain. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Frontenac Provincial Park, north of Kingston, Ontario. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.